Good morning, Cortland Dragons. I'm Naomi.
Y soy Noel.
And this is Cortland News for Thursday, February 27, 2025.
Primero vamos a hablar sobre las opciones del almuerzo.
Here's what we have on our lunch menu today. For hot, we have a hot dog, and for deli, we have a snack pack.
Otra vez será, pero caliente para caliente y paquete de bocadillos para deli.
Looking ahead to lunch on the next day, here's the menu. For hot, we have cheesy Bosco sticks, and for deli, we have a turkey and cheese sub.
El próximo almuerzo tendremos palitos de Bosco con queso para caliente y sub de pavo y queso para deli. Hello Dragons, I'm Noel.
And I'm Naomi, here to announce the Dragons of the month for February.
For kindergarten, in Mrs. Roshman's class, we have Gabriela Quintanilla de Horta and Charlotte Summer.
And in Mrs. Callahan's class, we have Libby Sprinkle and Arnulfo Figueroa.
In kindergarten, in Miss Hannigan's class, we have Liam Peterson.
In Mrs. Rosama's class, we have Danny Fitzmaurice and Brooklyn Moore.
For first grade, in Miss Haysker's class, we have Igor Martinez Munoz and Elizabeth Martinez.
In Mrs. Guzman's class, we have Gael Pizano and Emery Rodriguez.
In Miss Larson's class, we have Danielle Martin and Landon Mallet.
And in Mrs. Munity's class, we have Elijah Garcia and Jackson Murphy.
For second grade, in Mrs. Aska's class, we have Nora McDaniel and Fiona Beardsley.
In Miss Brown's class, we have Wyatt Jones and Aubrey Ristal.
In Mrs. Schweitzer's class, we have Michelle Garcia and Ella Blue Lozano.
And in Miss Dionisio's class, we have Giovanni Baltazar and Finley Frankel.
For third grade, in Stringer's class, we have Riley Manus and Deja Price.
In Miss Stalinoga's class, we have Noah Guaro and Thea West.
In Mrs. Hernandez's class, we have Scarlett Sanchez and Miguel Hernandez.
And in Mrs. Timmerman's class, we have Oliver Waterman and Jonael Gaudron.
For fourth grade, in Miss Shakir's class, we have Addie France and Monica Lanningham.
In Mrs. Ginneman's class, we have Maria Leon Hernandez and Rufino Dominguez Arlorco.
And in Mrs. Steers' class, we have Aiden Lithke and Deleza Robles.
And in Mr. Cabral's class, we have Sadie Bryant and Caleb Ehrman.
For fifth grade, in Mr. Jackson's class, we have Clara Wallin and Bilsey Montana.
In Mr. Tito's class, we have Zarina Rushani and Iris Johnson.
And in Miss Castillo's class, we have Zoe Hernandez Tapia and Adner Aguilas Hernandez. And in Seoul, in Mrs. Barnes' class, we have Santiago Rodriguez and Daniel Vences.
In Mrs. Bailey's Seoul, we have Demir Stewart Davis.
In Mrs. Newhouse's Seoul, we have Daniel Garcia.
And finally, in Mrs. Doyle's 4th and 5th grade class, we have Corey Campbell and Amir Kemp.
Congratulations to all our February Dragons of the month. Keep showing those positive behaviors, Dragons.
If you do, maybe we can recognize you for the month of March. Our special teachers would like to reward classes for their incredible behavior.
Y ahora los resultados de los premios de especialistas.
First, Miss Coulter from Music Award goes to Miss Hayseker's 1st grade for responsibility, using classroom materials, and Mrs. Brown's class, 2nd grade class, for being respectful, listening to peers.
The other music award goes to Mr. Jackson's 5th grade class for responsibility, working on the winter concert, and Mr. Cabral's 4th grade class for responsibility.
For PE, our teachers chose Miss Aska's 2nd grade for always giving their best effort during class, and Miss Rosama's class for always exhibiting disciplined behavior.
And the PE teachers also picked Mrs. Timmerman's 3rd grade for always using teamwork to accomplish tasks, and Mrs. Shakir's 4th grade for amazing effort every day.
Mrs. Borden from Art would like to recognize Mrs. Rosama's kinder for being respectful and ready for art, listening to and following directions and staying on task.
Mrs. Borden also chose Mrs. Aska for being on task during art time, listening to and following directions, and keeping voice levels low during class time.
Mrs. Borden from Art would also like to recognize Miss Hernandez's 3rd grade for being respectful to her and each other, helping each other out, listening to and following directions, and keeping an appropriate voice level during art.
Mrs. Borden also chose Mrs. Ginneman's 4th grade class for being on task during art class, listening to and following directions, and always being respectful to others.
Finally, the library award from Mrs. Leahy goes to Mrs. Larson's 1st grade for being very engaged during the Martin Luther King Jr. reading and discussion. They asked, but more importantly, knew most of the questions.
The other library award goes to Mrs. Schweitzer's 2nd grade for being attentive during story time and for keeping the appropriate voice level.
The other library award goes to Mrs. Ginneman's 4th grade for respectfully listening and asking great questions following the reader.
The other library award goes to Mrs. Dawanoga's 3rd grade for always paying attention and listening to the story. They asked great questions, too.
Now time for a joke. Why did the robber jump in the shower?
He wanted to make a clean getaway. Haha.
Keep being respectful, responsible, reflective, and safe. That's all the announcements for today, Cortland Dragons. I'm Naomi.
Y soy Noel. Gracias por ver las noticias de Cortland. Que tengas un buen jueves.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.